Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Zebarth. I'm with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Thank you for joining today's session. It's a state legislative activity roundup. I'm joined by two strong and fierce charter school advocates, Ariel Johnson from the Illinois Network of Charter Schools and Starlee Coleman from the Texas Public Charter Schools Association. We are going to do a few things today. First, at the outset, I'm just going to provide a broad overview of what we saw across the country. This session so far, there's still a number of states still in session, but just a roundup of what we've seen so far. And then we want to go a little deeper in two states and two different situations. First, we'll hear from Ariel in Illinois, a very blue state, probably one of the toughest states for charter schools. And Ariel and her team have been doing outstanding work over the last several years to protect the sector from a lot of attempts at harming charter schools, as well as still being able to advance some positive things for charter schools. And then we're going to go down to Texas and hear from Starlee, where the environment is, while still not perfect, definitely more favorable than what we see up in Illinois, and hear about all of the good work that was done there this session and what they were able to accomplish. But first, I'm going to try sharing my screen and talking a little bit about what we saw across the country. So first, just in terms of the context for this year's sessions, elections matter, and the results we saw in the fall of 2020 had a big impact on what I'm going to share this morning in terms of the results that we saw. We were fearful that we might see a repeat of 2018, where we saw a lot of anti-charter school governors and state legislators come in and push a lot of anti-charter school legislation. And thankfully, we saw the opposite, where we had, in at least most states, pro-charter school governors get reelected and win some races, as well as a more favorable state legislative climate in a number of places than we expected. The second, I think, major piece of context was Trump and DeVos were no longer in office. This was the first session where our opponents, particularly the teachers' unions, were not. Trump and DeVos as hammers against charter schools, particularly with Democrats. So I think that's significant. And then probably the most significant aspect of this year's session was the fact that we were still in a pandemic, and a number of pandemic-related impacts affected the debate about charter schools. First is it really raised in the minds of a number of people, including some governors and state legislators, the importance of parental choice. You had parents in situations where they wanted to send their kids back to in-person and they didn't have that option and were frustrated. You had parents in the opposite situation where they wanted to keep their kids at home and were frustrated if they felt like that wasn't going to be available to them. So it really raised the importance of parental choice in public education. The second thing was state coffers were increasingly flush with federal relief dollars as the federal government passed one relief bill after another. I just heard yesterday on the radio here in Michigan where our governor was saying we expected a $3 billion deficit. Instead, we have a $3 billion surplus. And I think that was the case in a lot of states. So the pressure on us in terms of the mythical argument our opponents make that we take money from districts didn't have as much punch, because districts are currently and will be flush with cash for the foreseeable future. And then the last thing is, in some places, our opponents, particularly unions, were more focused on debates around school reopening and budgets than they were on stuff. That wasn't universally the case, as we're going to hear, but I think in some states they were distracted this session on those other issues. So as a result, we had more opportunities to play offense across the country. We had more governors and legislators ready to expend some political capital on some offensive measures. And we also didn't need to play as much defense as we had feared. We had feared a repeat of 2019, where we had to play a lot of defense in a lot of places. And we, as we're going to hear, we still had to play defense, but just not as much. So I want to just do two things before we go to Springfield, Illinois, and that's provide a quick summary of the results that we saw in the National Alliance's priority states in our work with our partners, and then just kind of tick through some of the key victories in other places. We were involved in a number of states with our partners. One was Iowa. Iowa has historically had a very weak law, very small number of schools, and we were able to work with Governor Reynolds and a number of legislative leaders to pass a bill overhauling their law that will allow charter school founding groups to apply directly to the state. It provides charters with the flexibility to innovate, and it provides a high degree of accountability. So I think we felt like it's a game-changing bill in that state, and will finally open the door to autonomous and accountable charter schools to open. We also worked with our partners in Nevada. Nevada was in the midst of overhauling their public school funding system, and we were able, with our partners, to secure equitable funding for charter school students in that rewrite. And then I think most notably, we were able to secure $10 million in COVID relief funding for charter schools that serve Title I students. That started as a push for a tax credit bill for charter schools that serve Title I students in the amount of $15 million. And in the course of legislative horse trading, it ended up as a $10 million COVID-19 relief funding bill, which we think is still significant for those schools and will allow them to better serve Title I students. And then Nevada also mitigated or defeated all anti-charter school bills. What's key here is Nevada is a very blue state. It has a Democratic governor who's neutral at best on charter schools and is a couple of seats away from having supermajorities in each chamber. And we were able to work with a bipartisan coalition to accomplish these results for charter schools. Same thing in New Mexico, very blue state, Democratic governor who's neutral on her best day for us, and a increasingly progressive legislature. And in that context, for the first time in several years, we and our partners were able to enact a standalone charter school bill. It's focused on enrollment preferences. So it's an important bill, not a game-changing bill. I think what was most notable about it is that we were able to get a standalone charter bill enacted there in as blue of a place as it's been in a very long time. West Virginia passed a law a couple years ago, had a fatal flaw in that it only allowed district authorizing. This year, we were able to work with folks there to get a new state authorizer put in place in an appellate process with the existing State Board of Education. We are now working with the West Virginia Board of Education on regulations to implement that. Similar to Iowa, we think it's going to be game-changing and actually open the door to charters state. Wyoming, very similar to Iowa, very weak law, very few. And we were able to work with some partners there in an effort similar to Iowa to overhaul that law, adding a statewide authorizer, giving charter schools the flexibility to innovate so they're no longer charters in name only. Also ensuring strong accountability for their performance. So we're excited to see in 3 states for the first time the door open to founding groups who want to start public charter schools in those places. And then outside of the states where we were focused, there was a lot of activity this session. California is probably, if not Illinois, California is I think one of the most challenging places for charter schools politically right now. A bill was introduced there that would impose a raft of new restrictions and costs on charter schools. And the California Charter Schools Association, Charter Schools Development Center, and a number of others were able to push back strongly and get that bill tabled for this calendar year. It's a 2-year session. It could always be resurrected next year, but that is a very significant victory for charter schools. Colorado increased the cap on its moral obligation bonds for charter schools. That is probably one of the more innovative facility programs in the country and has significantly reduced borrowing costs for charter schools there over a long period of time. So they were able to increase the cap on that, which will allow more charter schools to get loans with the backing of the moral obligation bonds. And Colorado also defeated a bill that would have gutted the appellate process. It was a bill that was defeated on a 5-4 vote, so we had Democrats and Republicans both voting against it. But I think it signals, again, the fact that our opponents are going to continue to push anti-charter school bills. Connecticut increased per pupil state funding for charter schools for the first time in a number of years. It was in the context of changes they made to public school funding overall. So that was a very big win for charter schools in that state. Florida is one of our more favorable climate schools and passed a bill that did a number of things to create a more favorable policy environment, including allowing post-secondary institutions to serve as authorizers in that state. Our partners in Georgia got a bill passed that will increase state funding for district-authorized charter schools and also ensure that districts allocate a proportionate share of federal funding to district-authorized charter schools. A lot of what we're seeing across the country has to do with ensuring more equitable funding and more supportive facilities programs for charter schools. And Georgia was one of those states where we saw that. Indiana increased its facilities allotment to $1,000. It's currently about $750, so it went to $1,000 in the first year of the budget, and then $1,250 in the second year. Maine passed its law about 10 years ago. They have about 10 schools hit the cap. There was a bill there this year that would have gutted the authorizing and funding provisions of the bill and created an opportunity for opponents to basically slowly but surely close the 10 existing schools. We worked with the state authorizer and advocates there to rally the troops, and to their credit, charter school leaders, teachers, parents, and students stepped up big time and were able to defeat a bill in a very blue state that would have really imperiled the sector there. And then just a few more states here. Oklahoma increased state funding to charter schools. It was triggered by a lawsuit that the State Board of Education voted to settle earlier this year. That kicked the legislature into action and increased state funding to charter schools, so very big funding victory there. Tennessee allocated $24 million to its charter schools facility fund. And then lastly, Utah established a charter school closure reserve account to repay the funds when charter schools close, and seeded it with $1 million. There are a number of states still in session. We're paying particularly close attention to Ohio, where there's some very, very good provisions for charter schools in some of the budget proposals there. So we'll be keeping a close eye on to see what happens there. So just a few takeaways here before we turn it over to Ariel. The first is we achieved proactive and defensive wins in all manner of states. So we got some big wins in some red states, some big wins in some blue states, and some big wins in some purple states. And we're able to go on the offense and win, and also beat back some very harmful bills in all of these states, which just leads to the next conclusion, which is bipartisan support for charter schools isn't dead. It's definitely been challenged over the last few years, and we still have our work cut out for us, I think, on the Democratic side as well as in part on the Republican side. But we were able to see bipartisan coalitions come together in red, blue, and purple states and get good things done for charter school students and stop bad things from happening to them. It also made clear the importance of multi-pronged advocacy efforts, as we're going to hear from Ariel and Star Lee. When we build coalitions, when we engage our leaders, our teachers, our parents, our students, when we are on the offense on communications and are setting the narrative, and when we engage in electoral work, we're able to get big wins and to stop bad things from happening. And we're seeing more and more state charter school movements put all of those pieces together. And then the last thing I'll leave folks with is just a question, which is the calm before the storm of sessions next year. And by that, I mean, were our opponents overly distracted by all of the pandemic-related impacts, and are they going to be as distracted on those things next year? And if not, are they going to be more aggressive in coming after charter schools? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Ariel to talk a little bit about what happened in Illinois this year.
Thanks, Todd, and good morning, everyone. It's so refreshing to hear some of the great things that are happening across the country. I will say, Todd, kind of hit the nail on the head. Illinois has been a little bit different. We've certainly had a tougher session than what I anticipated, given that we were remote. So let me start by just kind of setting some context. So for the first time in 40 years, we have a new Speaker of the House. Our Speaker of the House is a part of he's the Illinois machine, like all the things you hear about in Illinois, he was that institution. And so for all of the reasons that that's a problem, it also, there's some foundation there that he provided. And so when he stepped back, we have all these new leaders coming up. And a new Speaker of the House who was kind of just thrown into the fray there without having the context on fundraising, on keeping your caucus together, all of those things. And with the supermajority in both chambers, you've got to be able to hold your caucus together, or you start to see factions within the caucus's form. And that's the Democratic side, but not dissimilar on the Republican side either. We are now seeing a shift in our state. We've got, some of our moderates and then our super conservatives, and they're parting ways as well, causing some real division. We also have a new Senate president, also Democrat. And we also have a relatively new mayor in Chicago. So all of this new leadership is a prime kind of a vector for the unions to be able to do what they do best, which is to kind of like pick and prod at the charter public school sector. So I'm going to talk about one particular bill that I want to flag for folks, because I think if they're trying it here, they might try it in other places. And then I'll talk a little bit about the offensive work that we're going to do. So the big bill that I want to discuss with you all, and the work that we have spent kind of all session on, is what we call a union neutrality, a gag order bill. And so what this bill does is it essentially prevents charter public school leaders from having a conversation with their team, with their teachers, with anyone in their building about how their school would change under unionization. So we're under attack in Illinois. They are unionizing our schools left and right, which would be fine if they weren't also trying to strip our funding away at the same time and put a ton of additional provisions that hinder our flexibility and our freedom. I can go through a list of bills that they filed this year. Most of them were the typical bills that we see and we're able to hold off pretty readily. But there were some new ones and I'm thinking in my head, oh, I see what they're doing. They're introducing this bill now, and they're going to push this in a couple of years. That's similar to the gender neutrality bill. I saw this a couple of years ago and thought, oh, this is a problem. And they did a full court press on it this year. So all sorts of First Amendment rights, all sorts of constitutionality issues. We are also in our state governed by the National Labor Relations Act. It is a violation of that act for a variety of reasons, also the federal preemption issues that did not matter. We had a embattled testimony where both sides were really kind of throwing their best shots. And for us, we're kind of in the middle here, because we have the unions who are pushing on the mayor's office and the union pushing on all this new leadership. And the leaders are saying, look, unions, we can give you most things. We can't give you everything. So pick what you want. And we're just hoping they don't pick our issue. They picked our issue. And they ran this bill to the very end. It was one of the toughest negotiations. We were able to kind of push the union neutrality issue aside. We kind of gave our rebuttal and our response. They came back with what they called labor peace agreements. We've seen labor peace agreements in other spaces, but in Illinois, they're only being used on new industries like cannabis and hospitality, not for education. I can't think of a single other state that is doing labor peace agreements in this way. And so, and just for context, it essentially says that there'll be we won't strike if we can just have some conversations, if we can just come into your school anytime we want, if we can just, utilize your space, if we can just, and you also can't talk to your teachers either, but we promise we won't strike. The issue there is that if you're not unionized, you don't really have a right to strike. So that's not really a give. And so our fear there was we were going to see an influx of labor peace agreements coming into schools in August and September, causing schools to shut down, and we wouldn't be able to, start the school year. We pushed that bill back. We went to the very end of session, May 31st on that. I flagged that for you all because I think it's going to come back again, and folks will if they're trying to get in a state, they're going to try it in other states. I'll pause there just to shift to some of the offensive things that we're trying to do as well. Our big issue is facilities. I was so happy to see so many folks working on facilities funding. We have no per pupil allotment in this state on facilities, and we're really behind the 8 ball on that. So that's our big initiative over the next couple of years. And what I'll say about both our offensive and defensive work is that we are only able to hold these things back. I mean, yes, we negotiate, and yes, we we show up, and we're in Springfield every single day that the legislature is in session, even when we're remote. But our two big kind of advocacy initiatives that help us keep hold the line, our parent and community advocacy work and our political work. That's it. We spend so much time cultivating our parents and our community work to be able to say there are, we have 1,000 parents who slipped it on this bill, or 1,000 parents who've shown up to session to push back. The challenging part is trying to convince these parents and help them understand. When I say to a parent, like, union neutrality or gap, that's such a far away foreign concept. So the amount of work that it takes to try to break that down in a way that makes sense, and so I can show like this how this actually affects your classroom. That's where the work is. But once they get it, they are fired up. So if I can encourage anyone, who's struggling with the parent advocacy, keep going. They're tired, just like your school leaders are tired, just like we're all tired. They're under attack all the time. But once they get it, they go. One of the things that I've been doing that I found to be really successful, parents will say, does our voice really matter? Does our impact really matter? Immediately showing them that it does in a couple different ways. When we're in testimony and they read the slips and they say there are, 2,000 opponents on this bill and it's all our community, making sure that we show them that on the other side. And then also showing them vote numbers. All of these anti-charter legislators who we're working against, showing them this person only won their race in 2020 by, let's say, 300, 400 votes. We have 300, 400 votes just in this, in our community, and having them feel like they have a real voice and a real power there. Separately, and I won't talk too much about our political work, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, we're heading into 2022. Every single state rep and every single senator will be up. We have made it clear that we will engage pretty heavily in 2022 if we can't find some flexibility and some real conversation on some of these really critical bills. I mean, there are some things that we just have to take care of ourselves. We just have to negotiate and battle it out. But on things that really affect the sector and will change the way the sector operates, you're talking about changing the autonomy of how schools create their programming, how they create their curriculum. And the unions pushing that, we have to be able to have some real conversations. But that's going to make it very difficult for us to be able to engage what we want in 22. And with new leadership that has reduced funding and reduced access, when you're Speaker of the House for 40 years, people just give you resources, right? That's not the case with our new Senate President and our new Speaker. They've got to find new resources now, and we're a part of that puzzle. But we can't be a part of that puzzle if we can't have basic, regular conversations and negotiations without kind of blowing up our sector. So I'll stop there.
That's awesome, Ariel. Thank you very much. Let's go over to Starlee and hear from Texas, and then have a little bit of time for some Q&A at the end.
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. So, believe it or not, our story is pretty similar in Texas. I know that probably seems hard to believe. It's just that our opposition comes wrapped up in a little bit of a different package, right? It's not, it's not the teachers' unions, which are pretty weak here, but it's the school district leaders here in Texas, where we have 1,000, literally 1,000 school districts in Texas. And so when you think about 1,000 superintendents and 7 school board members in each of those 1,000 districts, at least 7. That's a pretty challenging force. And in some of our rural legislative districts, some of those lawmakers in Texas will have 30, 40, 50 school districts in their district. So imagine the pressure, right, for a rural Republican lawmaker who has 0 charters in their district, but 50 school districts. It's hard to get their votes. So we face similar pressures, and we also face the same kinds of bills that other states are facing. Not the union-related bills, of course, but the other, threats to autonomy. Red tape stuff. They're basically rolling out, the sort of national union funded playbook here in Texas as well, just not on unionization of charter schools. But I will say we did. We are blessedly one of the states that only has a session every other year in Texas, and so. In 2019, when we had our last session, one of our top priorities was extending a law that had been on the books and related only to school districts in Texas that basically prevented, no matter what percentage of the teachers actually joined a teachers union in Texas, the union was barred from forcing the district into collective bargaining negotiations. And that law had been on the book for about 3 decades in Texas, but was never extended to charters. So that law last session was my top priority when I got to Texas. I mean, obviously reading the tea leaves of what's happening around the country, we had to get that addressed. And we were able to do that last session. So we just are not under the unionization threat that other states are facing, which I am obviously grateful for. But here's our political context. So in 25 years ago, when the legislature passed the charter law in Texas, the law passed in our state house 116 to 34, and in the Senate 30-1. And at that ago, the legislature was held by Democrats, and this was a Democratic-led initiative in Texas. At the end of 2019, after 2 decades of charter success in Texas, like objective success, our support, our bipartisan coalition in the legislature had dwindled to 76 to 74 votes, and that was a real wake-up call for us because last year in the 2020 elections, there was a real concerted national effort to flip the legislature here in Texas back, the state house anyway, back to being led by Democrats. And, with that vote count, that was pretty challenging for us to think about that political shift happening. So, to echo what Ariel said, the importance of the political work, we cannot understate that. The 2020, the threat that we were looking at in 2020 was real for us, and that kicked us into gear, in a way on the political side in Texas that we just hadn't needed to ever really engage, or that we thought we didn't really need to engage. So our sister organization, the C4 Impact here in Texas, that charter schools now raised and spent $2 million in the elections last year to try to preserve our bipartisan pro-charter majority. Happy to talk about the political work in another context at another time. But after all of that work, we ended up this session, we just analyzed our votes and really took a hard look at the trend line for us on our vote count. And even after all of that work, we ended up with a pure split, 75-75 for charter votes in Texas. So, when you have an evenly split legislature, obviously pushing forward proactive stuff is painful. We were able to block all the bad, which was good. Last session, two years ago, there were 40 anti-charter bills introduced in Texas, like all the stuff, right? All the things that you've all heard and seen in your states, all the things. So 40. This year there were 5. So we were on defense way less, which gave us some space and bandwidth to push some stuff forward. So we did have a pretty good proactive agenda that we were advancing this year. We got 4 out of 5 of our top priorities passed. Those included a bill in Texas, charters that lease buildings pay property taxes. So we were able to pass a bill to eliminate property taxes on leased buildings. We were carved out of a grant program that funds CTE equipment for schools. They specifically carved out charters when the bill was initially passed a couple of years ago. So we went back and fixed that. So charters will now have access to those funds. We really needed to make a critical fix to the designation system for dropout recovery schools here in Texas. They were being really unfairly punished by our state accountability metrics because the designation criteria was kind of wonky. So we needed to get that fixed. And then last session, we had a really transformative school funding bill pass. There was a program in that bill created to give teachers significant bonuses based on performance and outcomes of their kids. And that program was initially created only for certified teachers. And charters in Texas don't have to hire certified teachers, even though 75% of our teachers are certified. But that left 25% of the teachers who might be having a really tremendous impact on students' lives and their academic outcomes, who were not eligible for these really significant bonuses that are, in some cases up to $35,000 a year. So we needed to get that fixed, and we were able to do that. So now all teachers who meet the criteria, regardless of certification, traditional certification status, will be eligible for those bonuses. So those are some pretty good results, for the charter community here. We were proud of those. Our top priority, though, was really aimed at addressing an emerging issue for us that has become literally our number one barrier to growth in Texas, which is discrimination against charter schools in the zoning and permitting process by cities. So what charter opponents have not been able to do at the legislative level, which is to slow or stop the growth of charters and charter expansion, they are picking off city by city by city, basically fighting us at planning and zoning commissions. So we have had a bill now. This was our second session to try to pass a bill that just creates parity in planning and zoning issues, that essentially says whatever the process is that a city uses to evaluate a zoning request or a permit request from a school district is the same process that they have to use to evaluate a request from a charter. We had high drama over that bill, literally up until the very end, and ultimately we were able to pass the bill through the Senate, and we're not able to get it out of the House. So that remains on our agenda. That will be our top priority going forward. Last Thursday, 2 charter schools were denied a building permit in Dallas to expand their facilities to one to build a new building on property they already owned, denied. And then another one was asking for a permit to build on land that they have already owned to build a new school, denied. So this is, there is basically a de facto moratorium on new charter schools in Dallas because of the city discrimination issues in the zoning process. And they know it. Charter opponents know that this is what is happening. They talk about it. The school district superintendent in Dallas actually crows about this. He said in a meeting, he didn't know that it was a legislative staffer briefing in the beginning of session, and he didn't know that some of the legislative staff members were pro-charter folks that were on this meeting. And he said, we have found a way to beat charters at their own game through the Planning and Zoning Commission here in Dallas. So we know that this is their playbook, and I have talked to some of my counterparts and colleagues in other states, and we know that this is something that's starting to crop up in other places as well. So similar to Ariel, be on the lookout for this. Talk to your charter schools, ask them. Like charter schools weren't really flagging this issue for us until about 18 months ago, when more and more schools started to say, like, this is really weird. I'm not able to get a building permit out of our planning and zoning commissioner, out of our city council. So be on the lookout for that. I think this is going to be a tactic that they start to use around the country because it's been really successful for them. Similar to Ariel, I will just say, and what Todd sort of highlighted at the beginning, grassroots engagement, incredibly critical. We have two really sort of marquee programs for us where we're engaging teachers and engaging parents in the advocacy process here that we have never really done before. Certainly not to the level that we did this year. We had 10,000 people in 134 different counties engaging with their lawmakers this year through email and calls. That is significant. We had a Democrat from Dallas this year tell us we got his vote 0 times last session, 0. This year we got his vote every time that we had a bill on the floor. And he said, I asked why, and he said, I heard more from the charter community in my district than I ever have before. It matters. It matters. It changes votes. So we have to show them how important it is for them to engage with us. The political stuff matters. We solidified our support with some swing votes this year, both Republican and Democrat, that were sort of marginal for us last session. By engaging with them politically, we moved them solidly into the A+ camp for us. We have to do that. If people are going to put themselves on the line for us, we have to be there for them. That we will not continue to win if we don't protect our friends and make sure that they have the cover that they need. So that was really important for us to demonstrate in 2020. We know that we're going to have to do that again in 2022. We're expecting at least a dozen retirements of people who we put in our sort of solid, reliable camp. That's hard when our vote margin in the House is 75-75. And 10 of them are going to leave. Man, that's tough. But that's important for us to do. So that's Texas in a nutshell.
Thank you, Starlee. Wanted to follow up with you on, I think it probably would be surprising for people to hear that the split is 75-75 in the House, given how, I don't know what the Republican-Democrat split is there, but so you're obviously losing a good number or a number of Republicans. I don't know how many in what are the main challenges. I've always said, people tend to underestimate the number of Democrats who support us and overestimate the number of Republicans that support us, and I'm just curious, what have been the most effective anti-charter messages that have resonated with those Republicans so they're not supportable.
Yeah, that's totally where we were, Todd. Underestimating the number of Democrats, overestimating the number of Republicans. I think we had been relying, sort of counting on and relying that Republicans would continue to be supportive of charters over the long term, and they're just not. And in particular, that's when we analyze where our votes are coming from and where we are losing votes from session to session. It's rural and exurban Republicans. And the argument that we hear from them is obviously not going to be a surprise to anyone, but that we're taking, even if there are no charters in their district, the mere existence of charters in the state decreases the amount of money that could be flowing to traditional schools. And, obviously we know that that's not true. There's no reason to think that if charters didn't exist, that all of a sudden, all of that money that goes to charters would just suddenly get dumped into ISDs. We know that that's not true, but that's the argument that resonates with them. And like I said in the beginning, if you've got 50 school districts in your district and you're hearing from them every time a charter bill is up, it is really hard for you to say to them, I know we don't have any charters in our district, but it really matters to urban Democrats that I support this issue. Like rural Republicans are looking at them going, who, what, why do you, what, who cares? So it's a weird dynamic. We saw that a lot this year. We did not fully appreciate how hard those rural and ex-urban Republicans were getting worked here in Texas. We just had not been, frankly, we just had not been paying that close of attention to them. We just assumed we were going to keep getting support there. And we made a political miscalculation about how much attention and TLC they needed from us. And the other side happily swooped in, to fill the gap.
I find that those Republicans, ex-urban Republicans who have charters in the district act differently. Like, cause sometimes part of what we hear sometimes, hey, let's make sure there's charters in those districts because if they have constituents, maybe that can get the issue different and not be as opposed to it.
Yeah, I do think that matters a little bit. In the handful of those districts where we do have charters, it does matter. Those Republicans do act a little bit different. But the creating constituent piece of this. You can create constituents all day long, but if you don't translate that into voters, that just doesn't matter as much. And I will tell you that political conversation, the policy conversation changed for me a lot with lawmakers when I was able to show them how many registered charter parents and charter teachers we had identified in some of their districts. That conversation was different this session for us than it had ever been before, because I was able to say with a straight face, we have 5,000 charter parents and charter teachers in your district, and I hope that we can tell them you're going to support their schools. That is a different conversation for lawmakers. And when we get serious about showing them the potential impact that our community can have, that they get it.
We just have a couple of minutes left, Sterling. I think we lost Ariel. But I want to just close by kind of looking on the flip side in terms of Democratic support for us. So there's Ariel. And so maybe I'll kick this over to Ariel. We only have about a minute left, Ariel, but I'm just curious, those Democrats who continue to stand with us, why are they doing so at this moment when the party is moving so far to the left and they're getting so much pressure to not continue to stand with us? Why are they continuing to do so in Illinois?
Yeah, my apologies. I dropped off for a second. Yeah, I think the Democrats who are sticking with us are ones who have been vested in this in our space for a long time. There are folks who are still in the party now who helped create the charter law for us back in 99 and 2000 and see how we've grown and progressed. And I think for some of these new folks who've come in, they are also the products of school choice. They are the product, especially in our state, many of our Democrats are folks of color. We serve 96% people of color in our community. And that is that you can't deny the impact of that, right? And so for me to say to an elected official, a Democrat in particular, I know you went to private school, or I know that you got bused somewhere. You did not go to school in your neighborhood. They are using our platform as a way to say, like, look, we got to be honest here. We know that some of these schools are not serving our kids the way they should be serving them. So let's use this model as an alternative. And I'm seeing that shift happen. The challenge is not necessarily for us that it's Democrats don't like us. It's that our unions are so strong that they feel like they don't have, if they're the only hand on the table, they have to go with that. And so that's why our work is so important, to stay in the advocacy support and to stay on the political side so that they feel like they have an alternative that's not just them. I don't think it's an ideological issue all the time. I think it's an issue of like, I want to get elected and I want to stay elected.
Totally agree. Yeah, we hear that from young urban Democrats in Texas all the time. Like, they tell me to my face, I'm with you. But if I am too with you, I will lose. And if you want me to keep coming back to be a swing vote for you, I have to make sure that I can get reelected. And that's why we just like, we stay on the sidelines on politics at our own peril. We cannot continue to be the worst kind of friend in politics for these guys, right? They put themselves out there and then they face a tough election and we say, good luck. We hope you come back. That is not what the other side does. And if we are going to compete and stay on the field, we have to do the political stuff. So I totally agree with you, Ariel.
I know we have to go. I'll just say one last thing on that, which is for those who are nervous about that issue and like don't understand. We can't talk about that here. I understand that. But call us, talk to us. Like, we know how to do this and we know how to do it well for folks. But we can't, like to Charlie's point, we have to be able to give the an alternative perspective and a side. So just like, please don't be afraid of it. Like, let us know how we can be supportive and helpful, because what happens in our states is going to affect your states as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. You were terrific as always. And thank you everybody for joining today's session, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And we will see you in person next year. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.